Gentlefolk of the internet, welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight we drift, not march, not ride, but drift into a very quiet day in the life of Emperor Ashoka, the mighty Mauryan ruler who conquered vast swaths of the Indian subcontinent, and then decided he'd rather talk about kindness instead. There will be no battles tonight, no thundering elephants or flying arrows, just the soft scuff of sandals on polished stone, the rustle of palm leaf scrolls, and the occasional polite argument over fruit. Picture it, the air in Pataliputra, Ashoka's grand capital, is still. You hear nothing but the distant cooing of parrots, the rhythmic splash of water from the lotus pools, and perhaps one monk who fell asleep snoring while meditating under a neem tree. Ashoka's palace is not made of glittering gold. It's teakwood and sandstone, designed more to impress philosophers than kings. And yet it stretches wide, full of breezy courtyards and shadowed colonnades. You are the emperor now for this one very unremarkable day. You probably won't survive this, at least. Not without yawning halfway through your fourth edict consultation, but that's fine. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love hearing from all the sleepy corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise before the sun, not because you're disciplined, but because your personal bird wrangler forgot to cover the parrot cages again. There are 16 parrots, all of whom have memorized portions of the Dhammapada, but only about 3 lines each, which means instead of one smooth verse, your wake-up call is a chaotic patchwork of Buddhist aphorisms screamed from 16 small beaks. You consider writing a law about this. A servant enters your chamber bearing sandalwood oil for your morning ablutions. It's not particularly fancy, just warm and herbal, more earthy than flowery. You sit quietly while he anoints your forehead, palms, and feet. This is a daily ritual meant to ground the soul and moisturize the emperor. You appreciate the former, though your heels are still very dry. The palace walls are painted with simple murals, scenes of dharma wheels, banyan trees, and small animals that look suspiciously like cats but are labeled moral deer. A Buddhist monk waits for you just outside your chambers. His name is probably Tissa, because you have 4 monks named Tissa and 3 named Ananda. You nod to him and proceed barefoot across the cool tile. The snoring continues from somewhere behind a tapestry. You choose not to investigate. Outside, the gardens glisten with dew. You walk slowly through the eastern courtyard past still ponds and stone lions with slightly uncertain expressions. A pair of palace dogs, both named after virtues, amble at your heels. One is compassion, the other contentment, and they are both very bad at sitting still. You stop at the Bodhi fig tree planted in the central atrium. Legend says it was grown from a cutting of the actual tree under which Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment. Historians still argue whether that's true or whether it's just a very persuasive fig tree. You run your hand along its bark anyway. Breakfast will come soon. You have about 10 minutes to stand completely still and stare at the sky, which for once is not filled with palace pigeons. They've been relocated after last week's incident involving royal scrolls and guano. Another edict you had to sign. As the sun finally rises, light filters through the intricate stone latticework of the palace corridors. Patterns shift gently over the floor, as if the walls themselves are yawning. You wonder briefly if this moment could be carved into one of your rock edicts. You decide against it. Too quiet, not enough verbs. One of the younger scribes approaches with a question about syntax. You blink slowly at him. It is too early to discuss grammar even for an emperor of moral rectitude. He retreats, bowing nervously. A soft bell sounds, struck not with urgency, but with mild suggestion. It is time for your meal. You sigh, not out of displeasure but habit. Even your sighs are regulated. The hall where you dine is long, low lit and smells faintly of ghee. You eat alone not because you want to, but because conversation before sunrise is considered a karmic hazard. The food is plain steamed rice, boiled mung beans, and a chutney so mild it may just be mashed fruit with a good attitude. A single parrot is allowed to sit nearby during meals. Today, it's the oldest one, Little Cloud. He says only one thing over and over again. Desire is the root of suffering. It's hard to argue with, but he does say it with a tone that makes you feel personally judged. You finish the meal, place a hand on your stomach in brief meditation, and consider the next 8 hours of sitting. You are an emperor, yes, but more importantly, you are a man with a very busy chair. A servant approaches this one holding a small copper bowl. Inside, sandalwood paste and a folded note. You read the message slowly. It's from one of your provincial governors. He wants to know if it's acceptable to appoint his brother as chief buffalo inspector. You make a mental note to send him a scroll titled, "On Nepotism and the Nature of Suffering." You sigh again. The parrot sighs back. You are still digesting your breakfast when the philosopher arrives. He is not the official palace philosopher. Ashoka has at least 4 of those, and they're constantly busy squabbling over comma placement in royal edicts. But this one is a retired logician from Taxila. His name is possibly Yagnavalkya, or perhaps something with more syllables. You don't ask because it would imply you forgot. He smells faintly of ink and cardamom, and he walks with the slow certainty of someone who's never been wrong in his entire life, even when he definitely was. He bows. You bow back just a little because Dharma doesn't cancel courtesy. He sits down beside you under the shade of a carved pavilion and begins to explain again the nature of right speech and whether compliments can be truthful if they're about your sandals. He uses diagrams. One of them features a goat and what might be a metaphor for social restraint. You listen politely for 11 minutes before your mind drifts to breakfast. You remember the chutney. It was slightly sweeter than usual, possibly melon-based. No one confirmed, a mystery. The philosopher drones on. A peacock walks by. Eventually, the philosopher pauses to sip barley water, and you take this as your chance to stand. He follows you, unfortunately. Together, you walk toward the small inner courtyard where the aviary is kept. You've never officially declared it an aviary, but the parrot population has become unignorable. A young attendant greets you with a grim face. He gestures toward one cage in particular occupied by the parrot known as Wisdom Drops Like Rain. The parrot is upside down and muttering in a voice not its own, "Banana justice, banana justice." It locks eyes with you. You stare back. "Is it possessed?" the attendant whispers. You kneel. The parrot does not flinch. Historians still argue whether Ashoka was genuinely superstitious or just enjoyed indulging moments like these for their dramatic potential. You like to think it's the latter. With great solemnity, you extend a finger and tap the cage once. The parrot screams, "Desire is no banana justice," then sneezes, poops, and rights itself. You declare the possession over. The philosopher applauds. The attendant faints. You walk away. On your way back toward the administrative wing, you pass one of the palace's many shaded colonnades. A pair of scribes are arguing quite heatedly over whether the rock edict you issued last month about respecting all sects included followers of tree spirits. One scribe has a leaf in his hair and is gesturing toward a banyan as if daring it to blink. You make a mental note to clarify in your next proclamation, respect includes trees unless the trees demand rent. A small bell sounds. That's the signal for mid-morning meditation, but also for important guests. You decide to interpret it as both. A foreign envoy from the Greco-Bactrian region has arrived. He has brought 2 gifts, a jar of wine and an extremely confused monkey. The monkey is wearing a necklace and won't stop scratching at the wall mural of a cow. The envoy explains in very slow Prakrit that this monkey once sat beside a great sage for 7 days without blinking. You nod solemnly. You ask the monkey if that's true. The monkey burps. You accept the gifts, give the monkey a rice cake, and quietly assign a monk to keep it company. The monk sighs. The monkey claps. Friendship established. A moment later, another servant approaches. He whispers that a district minister from Ujjain has arrived with deep concerns about tofu. You blink. Tofu, to your knowledge, has not yet arrived in India. You ask him to repeat himself. He does. You send him to the scribes. This feels like a scroll-worthy matter. You step back into your smaller chamber, the one used for reflection and very slow breathing. You light a stick of incense. It's made from dried marigold petals and a trace amount of cinnamon. You inhale gently, then realize you may have grabbed the wrong stick. This one smells distinctly like yesterday's fish curry. You sigh. The incense sighs back. As you sit, your eyes drift to the corner shelf where several old manuscripts sit collecting dust. One contains a list of animals the palace once considered for royal mascots. You skim through it. Highlights include the unwavering goat, the flamingo of patience, the almost tiger, actually a striped dog. You close the scroll. You have work to do, but first tea. Your cup is brought to you with quiet reverence. It's a decoction of holy basil ginger and something described only as moonflower dust. You sip. It tastes like polite disagreement. You look out the carved window. A breeze shifts the linen curtains just enough to frame a view of the river Ganges rolling slowly in the far distance. Somewhere along that shore, merchants unload baskets of turmeric, monks mend saffron robes, and small children argue over whose mud sculpture is a better tribute to Vishvakarman, the divine architect. You are reminded of how large your empire is. Over 50 million people, some say. And yet at this exact moment, not one of them is interrupting your tea. Peace is rare. Best enjoy it before someone arrives with another opinion about buffalo taxation. You do not return to your main throne room because you know what's waiting there. Scrolls. So many scrolls. The kind of scrolls that are written in triplicate with sand seals and red ink annotations from people you don't remember appointing. The throne itself is comfortable carved teak inlaid with ivory and restrained authority, but the stack of documents next to it could flatten a reasonably stubborn goat. You sit. A courtier clears his throat in a tone that says, "I have something urgent to share, but I also know you're very tired." You nod. He steps forward and begins reading. Slowly. This scroll, it turns out, concerns the correct way to measure land near the Kalinga border. Should it be by the distance a cow walks in a day, or by the time it takes for your tea to cool during monsoon season? Historians still argue whether these were genuine measurement systems or just elaborate excuses to postpone surveys. You nod sagely and gesture for the middle solution. No one knows what that means, but they all bow in agreement. Next scroll, it's from the tax bureau. You're told someone in Gandhara has been paying their grain dues in lentils flavored with mango. Is this corruption or culinary generosity? You stroke your chin, declare a tasting tribunal. The court cheers. There hasn't been a tribunal since the Great Mustard Incident of year 8. Next scroll, a pigeon is sitting on it. You stare. The pigeon stares back. It appears to be official, a wax seal. The bird is perched delicately on your minister's handwriting, as if judging the spacing between letters. You reach out. The pigeon does not move. A scribe brings breadcrumbs. The pigeon still does not move. You declare it a temporary clerk. That buys you 5 minutes of not having to read anything. You spend them gazing at a small mural above the throne painted years ago. It shows you standing with an exaggeratedly perfect jawline and an extremely well-behaved elephant. You wonder if either of those was ever accurate. A knock echoes from the side door. That's odd. The side door is for non-urgent visitors and monks who wander in the wrong direction. A monk wanders in the wrong direction. He looks confused, slightly damp, and is holding a bowl of pomegranates. He bows. You bow. He offers you a pomegranate. You accept. He nods, turns, and wanders out again. You do not question this. You bite the fruit. It is shockingly sour. You declare the experience spiritually clarifying. The court writes this down. Now it's time for listening hours. These are your favorite. You don't have to talk, just nod while others speak at a gentle pace about things like cracked water jugs, suspicious goats, or marriage disputes involving two women, a sorry and a cursed mango tree. You listen with the composure of a man who once ruled by sword and now rules by patience. Today's lineup includes a northern merchant requesting permission to sell blessed salt in temple courtyards, a grandmother petitioning to name her grandchild after the empire's sacred goose, a sculptor asking whether statues of Dharma should be smiling or gently frowning. You approve all three with one unified nod. It's a very efficient system. Suddenly, someone sneezes. This would not normally be important, except it is followed by a small stampede of scribes running in from the west corridor, clutching scrolls and saying, "The goose is loose." You blink. You had forgotten the sacred goose was in the palace today. It was supposed to be part of a diplomatic gift package, 3 geese, a moonstone, and a carved sandalwood comb. But one goose apparently has decided to liberate itself. You do not rise. You merely sip your water. Someone will deal with it. Probably someone named Tessa. A few moments later, a novice monk runs by, arms flailing, trailed by a goose with powerful moral convictions. It honks exactly once. You feel judged. A breath of silence returns. Then a new scroll is brought, larger than the others and sealed in gold. It's from your son Mahinda. He's been preaching in Lanka again. His message is short. The mangoes here are sincere. You nod. That sounds like Mahinda. You begin drafting a response in your head. Be kind, wash your feet, avoid dramatic mangoes. Then you realize you should probably just send a parrot. You stretch, officially. That is, you perform the royal post-meal stretch, arms raised, wrists tilted, a slight groan. The court imitates you. It's good for morale. You gaze out at the midday sun pouring in through the court's lattice. Shadows crawl across the tiles like sleepy ants. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play, not a performance, just practice. It's slightly off-key, comforting somehow. A scribe asks if you would like to begin carving today's edict. You sigh. There's a large rock just outside the palace, already prepared. You glance at the draft. It's about non-violence again. You try to spice it up this time. Let all beings be gentle, especially those with pointy elbows. The scribe raises an eyebrow. You clarify, yes, that stays. Another scroll appears. You pretend not to see it. You close your eyes. You breathe in the faint smell of pomegranates, ink, goose feathers, and sun-warmed sandalwood. You decide this is what governance means, surviving until someone brings afternoon tea. The sun is high now, lounging directly over the tiled roofs of Pataliputra, like it has nowhere else to be. You take this personally. It's the hour of rest, technically, but also the time when every small matter that couldn't be squeezed into morning scrolls begins to arrive, disguised as quick updates. These are not quick. One involves the sudden reappearance of a tax elephant that had been missing for 3 months. Another concerns a misunderstanding between 2 palace cooks, 5 jugs of sesame oil, and a very slippery floor. You excuse yourself for a walk in the garden. This is not an act of leisure. It is by ancient imperial tradition a sanctioned method of avoiding additional paperwork. You are, after all, contemplating the nature of Dharma while also feeding a squirrel. The palace garden is vast, planned with the symmetrical obsessiveness of someone who definitely overthought the placement of every mango tree. The gravel paths crunch softly beneath your sandals. Each step feels deliberate. You pass rows of bright marigolds, ponds full of sleepy turtles, and a small bamboo grove that seems to whisper secrets when the wind hits just right. A gardener bows to you and offers a strange fruit you've never seen before. He calls it a sugar cucumber. You thank him, bite into it, and regret nothing. It's vaguely sweet, vaguely wet, and entirely confusing. You name it, good enough. As you walk, a moral thought creeps in. Perhaps the sugar cucumber could be a metaphor for balance, for moderation, or just for imperial snacks. You don't decide. Better to leave that ambiguity for the monks to argue over. A group of deer wanders into view. palace deer bred more for composure than speed. One of them is named Serenity, and she's chewing on a discarded sandal. You make a note to speak with the sandal department. You pause beside the inscription stone at the edge of the garden. It's one of your earlier works, something about tolerance and not yelling at vendors. The lettering has faded slightly. A squirrel has taken up residence on top. You consider rewriting it in rhyming couplets. Historians still argue whether any of Ashoka's edicts were meant to rhyme in the original Prakrit, or whether that was just the work of overly poetic stone carvers trying to impress someone named Padma. You kneel in the grass to pluck a weed growing near the inscription. It comes up with a small, satisfying snap. Behind you, the breeze lifts the edge of your robe. You feel momentarily like a wandering monk, except with more gold jewelry. Your shadow stretches long on the pathway, interrupted occasionally by the fluttering wings of lazy butterflies. You pass the goose pond. The sacred goose is no longer loose, thank the stars. It is now floating serenely, accompanied by 2 attendants and what appears to be a musical zither. You decide not to investigate further. By now you've reached the meditation pavilion, a circular platform shaded by banyan branches and lined with low cushions. You sit not to meditate exactly, but to rearrange your spine into a position that suggests spiritual depth. The philosopher from earlier appears beside you, uninvited but smiling. He sits. Silence follows. For 7 full minutes, neither of you speaks. Just the sound of chirping birds, the crackle of distant cooking fires, and the occasional faint clack of someone dropping scrolls inside the palace. Finally, he says, "Do you think virtue can be grown like a mango tree?" You look at him. You look at the tree beside you. It's a guava. You nod. He seems satisfied. Back inside the palace, somewhere in a dusty alcove, someone is reading aloud from the Book of Governance. You can just make out the voice echoing faintly. It lists 7 qualities of a good ruler, 5 of which you're pretty sure you already exhibited this morning. Especially willingness to let others talk while pretending to listen. You do listen sometimes. Like now, as a bee buzzes past your ear and the scent of turmeric floats through the air. A cook must be preparing for the evening meal. Your stomach grumbles gently. You allow it. You remember vividly the story from last season when a provincial chieftain tried to impress you with a dish made from river moss and hot stones. It was charitably crunchy. You had smiled the entire time. That chieftain now governs a very small district with no rivers. You rise from the cushion, brushing a single leaf from your robe. A squirrel nearby mimics you. You bow. The squirrel does not bow back. You respect that. Returning through the west corridor, you're stopped by a small child, one of the junior scribe's sons, possibly named Something with Hope. He bows deeply and hands you a folded drawing. It is apparently you seated beneath a Bodhi tree with an exaggerated crown and arms shaped like sun rays. You smile. You tell him you'll add it to the archives of emotional accuracy. The boy beams. As you continue down the hall, you pass a door carved with lotus flowers and unfamiliar runes. It leads to the diplomatic chamber, currently unoccupied except for a pile of silk and one confused peacock. You've grown used to the palace containing at least one slightly bewildered bird at all times. It feels right. A guard bows as you re-enter the main hall. He says nothing, but he hands you a note. You open it slowly. It reads, "The moon has been sighted before sunset. Is this permitted?" You stare at it. You decide yes, it is permitted. The moon may do as it pleases. The palace buzzes now with that particular flavor of afternoon activity that's neither urgent nor necessary. You could issue decrees. You could visit the archives. You could revise your latest edict on non-harm toward aquatic creatures. But instead, you find yourself invited, gently coerced, really into presiding over the Elephant Ethics Council. It is technically your idea. A few seasons ago, during a thunderstorm and a particularly introspective bowl of lentil stew, you declared that the royal elephants should be given time to explore their emotional truths. This has now evolved into a monthly gathering where the mahouts report on the mood, behavior, and spiritual concerns of the royal herd. You take your seat beneath a silk canopy. Before you, 3 senior elephant handlers, 1 monk appointed to provide moral clarity, and a junior handler nervously cradling a scroll. The elephants themselves stand nearby, swaying gently, tails flicking at invisible worries. The lead mahout speaks first. He reports that Madura, the oldest elephant, has refused to bathe since last week. Not out of defiance, but melancholy. You nod. The monk suggests reciting calming verses from the Sutta Nipata. The junior handler offers a more radical theory. Perhaps the elephant is bored. You consider both, then suggest a new enrichment item, a very large drum. Everyone nods. 1 elephant trumpets in agreement. Decision made. Historians still debate whether Ashoka truly cared for individual elephants, or whether this was an extension of his wider policy of kindness toward all beings. Either way, you just approved the first ever musical enrichment program for imperial pachyderms. Your legacy grows. Next on the agenda, a diplomatic problem involving birds. A message has arrived from your envoys in Sri Lanka. They've successfully delivered your latest peace offering, 3 golden geese and a palm leaf manuscript of moral sayings. However, a minor issue has arisen. One of the geese apparently bit a temple attendant. The monks are unsure whether this is a sign of divine rejection or just a bad goose. You stare at the scroll. You ponder. You write your reply slowly. Even a noble bird may act rashly. Teach it loving kindness, then send it home. You fold the parchment. You feel oddly proud. Before the scroll can be taken, another arrives. This one is from your daughter, Sangamita. She writes from a far-off monastery with news of her tree. The tree, of course, being the sapling of the sacred Bodhi tree she carried to Lanka. It has taken root beautifully, though a local goat seems determined to chew on the edges of enlightenment. You smile. You whisper to yourself, even wisdom tastes sweet to the hungry. A scribe hears this and writes it down, just in case it becomes the next edict. You wander now toward the Hall of Gifts. This is a low-ceilinged room filled with offerings from every corner of the empire and beyond. There's coral from distant seas, bronze masks from the northwest, ivory carvings of surprisingly emotive cows, and your personal favorite, a painted rock from a child in Magadha labeled for Ashoka who likes thoughts. You pick up the rock. You still like thoughts. In one corner of the hall, a newly arrived bundle awaits you, a woven mat made by monks from the southern forests. You unroll it. It smells like moss and faint sandal smoke. You sit on it cross-legged and allow your eyes to rest on the wall. There's a mural here one not often visited. It shows you once again not in battle or on a throne, but walking among deer and speaking to villagers. The proportions are strange. You appear 7 feet tall. The villagers all look like children. One of the deer is wearing earrings, but still, the sentiment is clear: you are no longer the conqueror. A servant enters bowing. He holds a tray of flower garlands. He says they were sent from a temple in Kausambi, where the monks have decided that Thursdays are now Ashoka Awareness Days. You ask what that means. He says it mostly involves quiet reflection and boiled yams. You approve wholeheartedly. There's a ripple in the silence. The low sound of drums begins somewhere near the elephant enclosure. It's soft, tentative. You smile. Looks like the enrichment has begun. You close your eyes for a moment. It's easy to forget how loud your early life was, the clatter of armor, the bellow of war elephants, the endless clang of ambition. But now the only clangs are ceremonial, and the only wars you fight are grammatical. You rise from the mat and make your way to the Hall of Echoes, a chamber designed to amplify chanting mostly used for poetry and edict rehearsals. Today it is empty except for an elderly monk reciting verses about impermanence to a bowl of rice. You do not interrupt. You return instead to the courtyard where the shadows are lengthening. A child runs past you chasing a hoop. An old man waters a vine. A pigeon lands nearby and coos with such deliberate rhythm that you momentarily wonder if it's trying to recite a mantra. You sit once more on the pavilion steps. The sun is beginning to lower. Your tea arrives lukewarm with herbs chosen to ease the moral burden of memory. You don't ask which herbs those are. You sip. You feel both lighter and slightly sleepy. There is still time left in the day, but not much. Just enough perhaps for a little candlelight. And one more good boring conversation. Evening drapes itself across the palace like a freshly folded shawl. Slow, soft, slightly scented with turmeric and jasmine. The air cools by only a few degrees, but you feel it instantly. The marble under your bare feet no longer radiates heat. It sighs, if anything, like a tired elephant settling into the earth. You return to your private quarters not in haste, but with the kind of gentle certainty reserved for men who've spent their afternoons authorizing musical enrichment for emotionally complex elephants. Inside, the lamps have already been lit. Not too many, just enough to cast thoughtful shadows on the walls. Each flicker seems to stretch your silhouette a little taller than it really is. It's flattering. You allow it. A young servant brings your evening robe woven with thread dyed from indigo and crushed berries. You don't remember authorizing berry-dyed anything, but it smells nice. You make a note to compliment the textile staff tomorrow, assuming you're not pulled into another goose tribunal. Another servant brings warm milk. It is not flavored because last week's attempt to add cinnamon resulted in a minor diplomatic misunderstanding with the Ayurvedic Advisory Board. So now it is plain, slightly sweet, mostly warm, and held in a cup carved from coconut shell. You sip, nod, and sit by the open window. Outside, the city of Pataliputra exhales. No carts rumble, no voices rise. The Ganges glints like a half-forgotten string of pearls in the distance. Somewhere far off, a flute attempts a lullaby and fails spectacularly on the high notes. You smile. It's comforting, really. No perfection, only sincerity. You are joined briefly by a courtier with your final scroll of the day. It is not long. It contains no complaints, no border disputes, and not even one proposal for a new tax. It is instead a thank you note from a village headman in the forested hills of Vidarbha. He writes in shaky letters, but clearly. He says that ever since you placed a stone edict near their well, a message about compassion between neighbors, the quarrels have stopped. You reread it twice. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's edicts truly influenced the people who read them, or if they were simply public reminders of ideals already whispered in homes and temples. But tonight, none of that matters. Someone thanked you. You placed the scroll in your private box next to a feather from your childhood pet and a coin no longer in circulation. You rise. The last task of the day is a short walk, one lap around the inner courtyard. You do this every evening, partly out of habit, partly because the jasmine blossoms open just after dusk and make the entire walk smell like a memory of a song you never quite learned. As you step into the courtyard, you find it empty. Except, of course, for a goose. Not the sacred goose, not even the diplomatic goose, just a random palace goose nibbling thoughtfully at a pebble. It looks at you. You look back. For a second, the two of you share a moment of total mutual disinterest. You walk past it. The goose nods. Back in your room, the monk assigned to evening chanting is already seated on a cushion. He begins soft, rhythmic, the cadence familiar like rain on a roof. You sit beside him, legs crossed, eyes half-lidded. Not quite meditation, not quite rest. Just being. The verses roll through the room like ripples across still water. You know every line by heart now. But each night they sound a little different, as if they are adjusting themselves to whatever version of you managed to arrive at the end of the day. Somewhere in the middle of the third verse, you think briefly about the rock you saw that morning, the one with the squirrel on top and the half-faded inscription. You wonder if the squirrel is still there. You hope it is. You think of carving something new beneath it. Peace is the space between one scroll and the next. The chanting slows, the monk finishes, he bows, you bow lower. The oil lamp flickers as he leaves and the shadows stretch one last time. You lie down on your woven mat head, resting on a folded robe that smells faintly of sandalwood and very faintly of parrot. You listen to the final sounds of your empire settling down, the shuffling of guard sandals, the distant click of bamboo wind chimes, the faint snore of a clerk sleeping on top of tomorrow's unfinished tax reports. You wonder, was this a day well spent? You decide absolutely. Any day where the goose doesn't escape twice is a victory. The oil lamp sputters gently. You close your eyes. And so, dear listener, we leave Emperor Ashoka here breathing softly in the silence he worked so hard to cultivate. Outside, the wind barely stirs the banyan leaves, and the palace sleeps not like a fortress, but like a monastery. The kind where no one is in a rush, and the loudest thing that ever happens is a well-meaning goose having a small emotional outburst. The day has folded itself into night carefully, like a scroll you don't need to read again. All the questions about justice, about kindness, about whether pomegranates should be eaten before or after a sermon can wait. For now, the emperor dreams of quiet rivers, steady elephants, and perhaps, if the night is generous, a sugar cucumber that actually makes sense. The world outside may be wide, but tonight it is far away. Here only soft stone low lamps and the occasional parrot muttering philosophical truths in its sleep. If your own eyes have begun to close, that's perfectly all right. You've traveled through empires and edicts across sandalwood halls and fig tree courtyards without ever lifting your head from the pillow. So breathe deeply. Feel the stillness settling over your chest like soft cloth. Let the silence do its work. You're safe here, you're warm, and you, like Ashoka, have earned a little peace. Good night. Gentlefolk of the internet, welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight, we rise very slowly, perhaps with a groan, into the mildly smoky world of medieval blacksmithing. Not the dramatic molten metal sparks flying everywhere kind. No, tonight we'll spend an entire day with a particular village smith known more for staring blankly at glowing coals than for making anything especially sharp. You might think this will be exciting. Anvils fire, red-hot iron twisted into swords. But you, dear listener, would not survive 5 minutes in this forge. Why? Because the first 3 of those minutes involve staring into a pile of warm ash, and the other 2 involve trying to remember where your other sock went. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love reading those. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are awake, or at least your eyes are open. Your legs haven't quite agreed to participate, but your eyelids have made the noble decision to let sunlight in. Somewhere outside, a rooster shouts with the conviction of a creature who has never once questioned its job. You ignore it. You've learned this trick: if you stare at the wall long enough, sometimes the rooster gives up. The smell of old ash lingers in the air. That and something faintly egg-like, though you haven't had eggs in 3 days, possibly 4. You make a mental note to check the pantry later. You won't. You sit up. The small cot creaks in complaint, so does your back. The blanket is made of something coarse and indestructible, possibly burlap, possibly the collective regrets of sheep, and it tumbles off your legs with a shush. You pad across the forge, still barefoot, stepping around a confused chicken that seems to have wandered in again. You nod politely. It nods back. You both continue about your business. Breakfast is in theory an option. There is bread. It is hard, very hard. You consider dipping it in water. You consider just chewing through the sadness. In the end, you place the bread on the windowsill for later and pretend that counts as a decision. Instead, you walk to the hearth. The coals are low, not quite dead, but certainly not lively either. You crouch arms on knees, chin in hands. The fire glows faintly. You stare. Minutes pass. It's not that you're meditating. It's more like your brain is a tired donkey that sat down in a field and refuses to move. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths in small medieval villages actually spent this much time doing nothing, or if surviving records simply left out the boring bits. But in your case, this is the record, and the boring bits are the entire scroll. The coals shift. One gives off a tiny crackle. You murmur something like, "Good lad." No one responds. You reach for the poker, not to stoke the fire, just to hold. It's slightly warm and comforting in a vaguely dangerous way. You prod a log half-heartedly. A spark jumps out, tries to escape and fizzles. You name it Arnold. It is now mid-morning. A light breeze wafts in through the forge's open window. It carries with it the scent of someone else's breakfast, possibly porridge, possibly boiled shoe. Your stomach grumbles, but you remain committed to your hunger through inaction approach. You finally stand. With the grace of a tree deciding to stop being horizontal, you shuffle to your small workbench. You pick up a pair of tongs. You put them down. You pick up a horseshoe. You turn it over 3 times, then place it back exactly where it was. You feel productive. Outside, you hear the sound of distant hammering. Someone's repairing a roof again. You wonder if they're using nails you made. You wonder if they noticed the one shaped like a tiny eel. You decide not to ask. The chicken wanders by, again clucks once, and leaves a small feather behind. You watch it float down. You stare at the feather for a while. You briefly consider forging a spoon out of it. You dismiss the idea. It's too advanced for this hour. The embers call to you again. You return to the hearth. This time you sit on your small stool. It leans slightly to the left, has for years. You've grown fond of the imbalance. It feels honest, like life, or soup with too much onion. You stare. The coals are redder now, deeper, more molten in the middle. They shift in patterns that almost mean something like messages from the gods. If the gods communicated entirely in vague warmth and occasional crackles. You lose track of time. One foot falls asleep. The other starts tapping a rhythm you don't recognize. You consider composing a song based entirely on forge noises, Ballad of the Slightly Too Cold Bellows. You hum a bit. The chicken disapproves. Finally, your apprentice arrives. He's 12. His name is possibly Wolf or Wilf or just Hay. He enters without knocking trips over the firewood pile and launches immediately into a monologue about a dream he had where he turned into a goose and no one noticed. You nod politely. He continues. There were feathers and bread, possibly magical bread. You only catch every other word. Your focus returns to the fire. He asks what he should do today. You point vaguely at the anvil, then at the tongs, then shrug. He gets to work hammering something. It's unclear what. The rhythm is terrible but enthusiastic. You return to staring at the fire. It understands you. It doesn't ask questions. Wilf, or possibly Wolf, has been hammering the same piece of metal for the past 20 minutes. It is unclear if he's shaping it into something useful or simply introducing it to the concept of being mildly flat. Either way, he hums while he does it. The tune is haunting, possibly unintentional. You remain seated by the hearth, still holding the poker, still poking occasionally at the coals, more out of companionship than purpose. The fire flickers gently. It's alive but not energetic, kind of like you. Wilf pauses in his hammering to recite a poem he just made up. It's about chickens and destiny, and possibly a sword made entirely of feathers. You nod sagely. He beams. Apprenticeship in your forge is less about instruction and more about exposure. You expose him to metal, to heat, to failure, and to the importance of sitting very still while pretending to think. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths formally trained apprentices with structured techniques or simply hope they pick things up through osmosis and staring. You lean firmly toward the latter. You finally rise and cross the forge floor. Your knees protest. Your ankles file a formal complaint. You ignore them all and retrieve a dented helmet from the shelf. It's not been ordered. It's not even for sale. You just like holding it. You inspect the dents. There are 3, one of which resembles a startled mushroom. You try to remember which battle it came from, possibly the Great Cabbage Skirmish of last autumn. That one got weird. Wilf asks if he can try the bellows. You hesitate. The last time he did, he somehow set a loaf of bread on fire without touching it. You nod anyway. He approaches the bellows like a man trying to charm a dragon, gently, then suddenly, aggressively. The forge breathes, the fire grows, a puff of smoke spirals upward and briefly forms what might be a duck. No one comments. The warmth in the room increases just enough to make you sweat faintly. You remove your outer robe and hang it over the door, where it immediately begins to absorb the smells of iron and charcoal, and that faint hint of failure that always lingers after Wilf finishes a project. He returns to the anvil. You decide to be productive relatively. You fetch a half-finished horseshoe heat, place it on the anvil, and begin to hammer. The rhythm comes slow. Tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It's not music, but it's familiar. Your mind drifts. You think about the fire. You always do. There's something about it, something hypnotic in the orange-red glow, the soft hiss, the occasional flurry of sparks like thoughts escaping from your head. You don't fear fire, but you respect it like an old neighbor with questionable hobbies. You've spent more time looking at flames than at people, and honestly, the flames have made more sense. The horseshoe isn't bad, a little off-center, but it'll do. You dunk it in the quenching barrel. The steam rises with a sigh. You feel the same. You look over. Wilf has created what might be a dagger, or a very aggressive fork. It has 7 tines and no symmetry. He names it Gertrude. You nod. You consider correcting him. You don't. Instead, you sit on your favorite bench, the one that wobbles slightly, and open your ledger. There are no new orders. There are, however, 4 IOUs written in chicken scratch. One is from a man who traded you a song for a ladle. You haven't used the ladle. The song was average. You close the ledger and set it aside. Outside, footsteps approach. You and Wilf look up. You squint through the smoke-hazed doorway as the local baker passes, dragging a cart and humming tunelessly. He waves. You wave back. His cart contains exactly 1 large loaf of bread and possibly a cat. You both stare for a moment. Then, silence. You return to the forge. The fire has shifted again. It now glows deeper in the center, like a thought you can't quite name. You lean in closer. 1 spark jumps upward and lands on your apron. You brush it off absently. It sizzles and vanishes. You exhale through your nose, the medieval equivalent of ambition. Wilf begins organizing your tools. Badly. He puts the tongs where the hammers go. The small mallet ends up inside the water barrel. The pliers are hung from a nail that doesn't exist. You let it happen. Learning through confusion is still learning. You glance at the old bellows. It wheezes, deflates slightly, and then expands on its own. That's not normal. You make a note to investigate it later. You won't. Instead, you pick up the poker again and return to the fire. It's comfort. It's company. It doesn't ask questions, doesn't need spoons, doesn't try to reinvent swords. Just heat. Just light. Just the faint sound of something shifting within itself. Like you really. You and the fire, 2 sleepy workers stuck in the same long, flickering day. The midday bell from the church tower rings once faintly. Then again, with more enthusiasm, as if the first attempt was a polite suggestion and the second is a stern reminder. You glance at Wilf. He stops mid-hammer, wipes his brow with a rag that's mostly ash and wishful thinking, and declares it lunchtime. You nod, not because you agree, but because you've been hoping someone would make the decision for you. Your lunch is, in a word, minimal. Bread, Very dry bread. So dry, in fact, that you briefly consider forging a small knife just to get through the crust. Instead, you dip it in your tin cup of water. It doesn't soften, it floats. You stare at it as if daring it to absorb anything. Wilf produces half an apple and a turnip. He offers you part of the turnip. You decline in a tone that suggests great sorrow. He eats it anyway, crunching with the intensity of someone who believes chewing louder will create more flavor. The forge cools slightly as the bellows rest its leather sides deflated like a sighing ox. You've always suspected it dreams during these breaks. Occasionally it twitches. Wilf pulls out a strange little object from his satchel. It's round, made of iron, and has 7 holes in it. You didn't make it. You ask where he got it. Found it in the creek, he says, proud. Might be for bees. You nod slowly, trying to imagine the sort of bee that needs iron. You decide not to ask further. Some mysteries are best left submerged. Then, as if the forge has grown bored of your contemplative meal, the bellows heaves dramatically and sends a gust of air toward the hearth. The fire responds with a roar that startles both of you and sends Wilf's turnip bouncing off the workbench and into a bucket of soot. The bellows wheezes again, this time higher pitched. It expands, it shudders, and then for no clear reason it detaches slightly from the floor and lifts 3 inches into the air. Both of you stare. It doesn't float so much as hover, like an elderly goat trying to remember how to leap. Then it settles back down, creaking in a way that sounds distinctly smug. Wilf says nothing. You say, "We don't talk about this." He nods, solemn. You finish your bread, which now resembles damp clay, and rise to your feet. The warmth from the fire has returned. The air is thick with iron dust and something else, something floral. Possibly Wilf's sock, which was drying near the forge and is now mysteriously gone. You retrieve a set of tongs and a partially forged hinge. You begin to work. Tap, tap, scrape, adjust. It's not exciting, but it's comforting. The kind of work you can do while thinking about other things, like how the sunbeam hitting your floorboard is moving just fast enough to be annoying, or how the cobbler down the road insists shoes should breathe and has therefore made 3 pairs entirely out of lattice. Wilf begins singing again. It's a new song. This one involves frogs and wheels and an emotionally distant wizard named Mervyn. You hammer slightly louder. But despite the chaos, the floating bellows, the soot-covered turnip, the unsettling smell of ambition coming from Wilf's half-forged bee sword, there's something peaceful about the rhythm of it all. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths in small villages were community hubs of essential labor or just the only place with enough fire to stay warm in winter. You suspect it's both. The hinge is finished. You cool it. You hold it up to the light. It's fine. It will hinge. That's all anyone can ask. You wipe your hands on a cloth that hasn't been cleaned since the king's coronation and decide it's time for a short break. You sit near the window, where a breeze sneaks through the cracked frame. Outside, 2 children are chasing a goat that may or may not belong to anyone. It has a ribbon. The children do not. Wilf leans against the doorframe and says, "Master, what's the difference between a nail and a tiny sword with no handle?" You stare at him. He stares back. You say intent. He nods slowly as if this is a profound truth. It is not, but it's enough to send him back to the anvil to make practice nails, which is code for whatever strange metal shapes he's been inventing lately. The bellows shifts again. You ignore it. You've learned that acknowledging its behavior only encourages it. Instead, you clean your hammerline up your tools and take a moment to watch the fire again. It's changed. Now it crackles with quiet mischief, like it knows something you don't. One glowing coal pulses with such intensity that you briefly wonder if it's become sentient. You name it Reginald. Reginald blinks. You consider forging something new, maybe a spoon, or a ladle, or one of those mysterious spiral things that no one understands but everyone pretends to need. You lift your hammer. Wilf drops a nail on his foot and shouts a word that sounds like blork. You lower the hammer again. You will try again in the afternoon. For now, the fire is warm. The goat outside has joined the children in their game. And Reginald, the coal, continues to glow with unknowable calm. The sun has begun its gentle descent, casting golden rays through the open shutters of your forge like it's trying to help. It isn't. All it does is highlight the dust in the air and the fact that you haven't swept in about, well, ever. A customer appears at the doorway. You recognize him, a local farmer with an impressive mustache and the emotional range of a tree stump. His name is probably Irwin, but you've always called him the Spoon Man for reasons that are about to become extremely relevant. He steps inside, ducks under the iron wind chime, which you didn't make on purpose, and nods as if entering a cathedral. You nod back equally reverent, mostly because it would be rude not to. "I need a spoon," he says. You don't ask why, you know better. You just gesture to the bench and ask, "Wooden, iron, or that strange third material you brought last time?" He doesn't answer. Instead, he sits down, sighs dramatically, and begins telling you a story about frogs. Again, this happens every time. The Spoon Man has a theory about frogs, several in fact. Today's is about how frogs are secretly listening to his dreams and stealing his ideas for bread. You listen as always with a slight tilt of the head and an expression that suggests interest but not commitment. Wilf listens too, mouth slightly open, nodding at the appropriate moments. You begin shaping a spoon. Nothing fancy, just a nice round bowl and a handle that doesn't threaten the user. The forge hums. The bellows twitches once like a cat dreaming of vengeance. Outside, a cart clatters past. It's being pulled by 2 donkeys and a goat. The goat looks vaguely familiar, possibly the ribboned one, possibly an accomplice. The Spoon Man begins talking about stars. Specifically, how spoons reflect starlight and how this has implications for nighttime agriculture. You file this information away under mystical nonsense, a category that now takes up most of your brain. The spoon takes shape. It is admittedly a good spoon. You dunk it into the quenching barrel. Steam rises with a sigh. Wilf applauds quietly. The Spoon Man doesn't notice. He's describing a frog that lives in his well and possibly has opinions about politics. You present him the spoon. He accepts it solemnly, turns it over in his hands, then places it beside him and continues talking. You begin to suspect he didn't actually come for a spoon. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths served unofficial roles as village therapists, listeners, or simply warm places to monologue. You're beginning to lean toward yes. The Spoon Man launches into a memory about his grandmother's soup, which involved onions, mint, and a regrettable amount of goose. He grows misty-eyed. Wilf does too, though it's likely from the onion mention. You glance at the fire again. It's lower now, settled into that dreamy orange where it glows more than it flickers. You add a log more out of courtesy than necessity. The log catches, and for a brief moment, you see Reginald again, still glowing, still judging. The Spoon Man finally rises. He nods, mutters something about spoons having memories, and leaves with the one you made. You're not entirely sure he paid. You're not entirely sure he knows how. You don't mind. Wilf sits on a stool, eyes wide. "That was beautiful," he says. You respond with a non-committal grunt that roughly translates to perhaps. You look at the forge, then at the sky outside, then back at Wilf. "I suppose we should make something you say," what he asks. You shrug. You pick up a piece of iron, you stare at it. He stares at you, you both stare at it. Nothing happens. Then Wilf says, "Maybe we should make a very small ladder for who you ask." "Emotionally distant squirrels," he replies, deadpan. You blink. Then you say, "All right." He begins drawing designs in soot on the bench. You do not stop him. You walk over to the fire again. The warmth wraps around you like a sleepy cloak. The orange glow dances over your tools, your walls, the bucket of water you still haven't emptied, and your spare pair of boots that are technically made from 3 different left boots. You stare. You're getting good at this. The art of unblinking, motionless contemplation. The monks up at the abbey may have their prayers and quiet chants, but you have soot smoke and a mysterious ability to name every spark that flies from your hearth. You see another one now, tiny, fast, ambitious. You name it Beatrice. Wilf sneezes, you look over. He's drawn a squirrel on a throne. It looks unimpressed. You give him a thumbs up. He nods. The forge breathes again, slowly, gently. It's not just a workplace. It's a place where time slows down, where spoons have stories, and where the difference between working and thinking about working becomes deeply philosophical. You return to your stool. The day is far from over, but it's already full. The afternoon drifts along in the same way. Smoke rises slow, curling a little, unsure where it's going, but committed to the journey. You've now shaped exactly one nail. Not a bundle, not a batch, just one. It's fine, maybe slightly crooked, but earnest. You consider naming it, but decide you've already assigned too much personality to inanimate objects today. Reginald Beatrice, Gertrude the fork blade. Still, you tuck the nail carefully on the shelf next to a pile of ones that have quite frankly seen better ideas. Wilf is humming again. This time it's a lullaby for hammers sung softly while he rearranges the scrap pile into what looks like a reclining lizard. He calls it art. You let it slide. The forge is quieter now. The bellows, perhaps tired from its earlier attempt at ascension, has returned to passive cooperation. Occasionally it lets out a faint wheeze like a dragon with allergies. You glance out the window. The shadows have lengthened. That one crooked fence post across the lane has started to stretch toward your door, like it's trying to join you for tea. No one has come in for hours, which is good. You don't want customers. They ask questions. They need measurements. They sometimes request things like hinges with emotional resonance or shoes for a horse with self-esteem issues. That last one turned out fine, but you never got paid. The horse seemed grateful, though. You pick up a flat bit of iron and stare at it. It stares back. You wonder if it could become something. A tool, a blade, a piece of abstract social commentary. Instead, you sigh and return it gently to the table. It's not its time. Wilf has started talking to the lizard sculpture. He's giving it a voice. It sounds suspiciously like the baker. You don't interrupt. Instead, you crouch near the fire again, elbows on knees, posture fully in pondering sage mode. The coals glow. A few sparks twitch at the edges. One looks like it's trying to spell something in Morse code. You squint. You name it Kevin. Kevin disappears mid-message. Classic Kevin. You shift your attention to your hammer. It's an old one. Worn handle, scarred face, a bit of someone else's beard probably still embedded in the grip. You've had it for years, never replaced it. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths personalized their tools or just grabbed the nearest heavy object. You suspect it's both. This hammer, though, this one knows you. It forgives you when you hit the wrong angle. It tolerates being used to prop open windows. It once survived being dropped into a stew. Wilf still talks about that stew. You pretend to forget. You do not forget. You sit back on your stool and tap the side of the anvil with the hammer. Clink, pause, clink, pause, clink. It's a rhythm that means nothing and everything. Wilf taps back using a file and a bit of piping. You're not sure if he's answering or challenging you to a duel. You nod. He bows deeply. The lizard sculpture nods too, or collapses, it's hard to tell. You decide to clean something. There's a set of tongs on the shelf, coated in a fine layer of forge grime. You wipe them down with a cloth that in any other context might be mistaken for a dead badger. The grime shifts, but does not disappear. You accept this. Some things are meant to stay just a little bit dirty. Wilf attempts to light a smaller forge fire in a clay bowl. You allow it for educational purposes. It smokes impressively, smells of old onions and regret, and immediately causes a moth to faint mid-air. You both watch the moth recover and crawl under the bench. It will probably be fine. You glance at the spoon shelf. There are 5, all slightly different. One has a handle that curves dramatically as if it's fleeing the bowl. Another is perfectly round but entirely flat. Useless, but satisfyingly symmetrical. You pick up the third one, the one that survived the great porridge spill of last winter, and turn it over in your hands. It's good. Heavy. Honest. Like a friend who doesn't talk much but always shows up on time. You place it back and stare at the wall for a bit. Wilf is humming again, the same tune. You begin to suspect he only knows one. You finally rise, stretch, and announce that you will now be forging something completely normal. Wilf gasps in theatrical excitement. You heat the iron, you place it on the anvil, you hammer it 3 times, you pause, scratch your chin, turn it sideways, you hammer it again. It is a hook, or will be, a useful simple hook for hanging things, or defending oneself against particularly lazy poultry. You hold it up. It's a hook. A pause. Then Wilf claps. You bow with the grace of a nobleman who has just presented his finest work aggressively, average, undeniably functional, and somehow vaguely fish-shaped. You quench it. The steam rises. You sigh. The day is fading, so is the heat. You watch the fire dim ever so slightly. Reginald has retreated. Beatrice seems distant. Kevin is probably off sulking. The forge is settling. So are you. The light outside has taken on that soft golden tint that makes even chickens look majestic for about 10 minutes before bedtime. It spills across your dusty floor, turning every fleck of soot into something poetic or sneeze-inducing. Wilf has finished his lizard sculpture and now insists it's a guardian spirit of the forge. He's fashioned a tiny crown from spare nails and placed it proudly on the creature's ash-encrusted head. You approve with a sage nod. The lizard, for its part, appears to accept the responsibility with stoic silence. You begin tidying not because it's urgent, but because the act of organizing your tongs into size order gives the impression of productivity while your mind drifts elsewhere. Wilf offers to sweep. You allow it, though the broom is more bristle than handle these days, and his sweeping technique resembles someone trying to chase away invisible chickens. Still, the gesture counts. Mostly. You retrieve a cracked wooden box from beneath your workbench. Inside, chalk an old compass which points nowhere useful and a folded piece of parchment labeled "Do Not Open." You open it. It contains a doodle of what might be a cat on stilts. You nod, then put it back exactly as you found it. Some mysteries deserve their rest. Then, from the corner of your forge where the shadows cling the longest, you hear it. A knock, not loud, not urgent, just tentative. You approach the door and push it open. No one is there, only a small sack. Inside, 3 potatoes, a note reading, "For the hook and a single copper coin polished to a shine that suggests guilt. Payment has arrived." You accept the transaction with grace and place the potatoes in the vegetables that might explode basket near the hearth. Wilf returns the broom to its hook. Not the one you made earlier, that one is still cooling, but a different older hook with less enthusiasm. Still, it does the job. The bellows gives one last puff of approval before collapsing into stillness for the evening. You lean against the doorway and look outside. The village is quiet now. Only a few figures move along the path. A woman balancing a bucket of eels, a boy chasing a duck with unclear intentions, someone singing about cheese very softly, possibly to the moon. You stretch. Your back pops in 3 distinct places. Each one seems to release a specific memory. A festival where you forged spoons competitively, the winter you warmed soup over the forge, and that one time you fell asleep mid-hammer and dreamed about being a horseshoe. Wilf stares at the fire, chin resting on his fists. "Do you think the fire thinks about us?" he asks. You consider this deeply. Then say, "Probably, but it's too polite to say." He accepts this with a nod. You begin banking the fire. Not extinguishing it, just softening it, tucking in the coals like a blanket over glowing thoughts. The forge dims, flickers, then settles into a low pulse like a dragon taking a nap with one eye still open. You return the tools to their places, each one worn familiar, slightly off-center. Wilf gathers his things. He picks up the nail he made earlier and examines it like it's a relic from a forgotten age. "I shall name him Gerald," he says. "He is bent but strong." You clap him on the shoulder. You stand at the door as he leaves. He waves. The ribboned goat trots after him, uninvited but confident. You do not stop it. You return inside. The forge smells of iron dust stories and something slightly floral, possibly from Wilf's sock still missing. You exhale slowly, then sit back down in your chair. One final glance at the fire. It's still warm. It always is. You stare as you often do, not really thinking, not really not thinking, just being with the fire. With Reginald and Beatrice and Kevin wherever they are. With the sound of a forge settling for the night and the whisper of soot drifting downward like lazy snow. You're not done. But for now, you've done enough. The fire crackles softly now, more whisper than roar. You sit beside it, not working, not watching, just resting. The forge is still around you, the tools hanging like sleepy sentinels, the anvil cooling in its corner, the faint warmth of the day still tucked into the stones of the floor. You let your gaze soften, letting the orange glow blur around the edges of your vision. The world beyond the forge fades gently, replaced by the slow rhythm of your breath and the distant creak of wood cooling after a long day. A coal shifts. A spark rises. Just one. It dances briefly in the air before vanishing into the rafters like a secret. You don't chase it. The night has settled outside. You can feel it in your bones, the way the air thickens slightly, the way even the wind sounds like it's walking slower. You sigh. Not out of weariness, really, but from the small, quiet satisfaction of having done your part, however small. One hook, one crooked nail, a spoon for a man who talks to frogs. You reach over and gently close the forge door. It clicks shut with a sound like punctuation, like a comma. Not the end of the story, but a pause, a space to breathe. And you do. Breathe, that is. Deep, slow, warm. The fire glows on behind the door, still alive but ready to dream. Like you. Tomorrow there will be more iron, more requests, more spoon theories, and Wilf's misaligned enthusiasm. But for now you rest. And the forge rests with you. Gentle folk of the internet, welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight we follow a day. Just one slightly lopsided, deeply unremarkable day in the life of a tired, slightly confused sorcerer. Outside your window, the forest mist curls like sleepy fingers around crooked towers and mossy paths. Owls are snoring. The sun is technically rising, but it feels more like it's apologizing. And inside your stone cottage, tucked under 3 wool blankets and an enchanted pillow that hums lullabies in old high Elvish, you're refusing to get up. Because today is already strange. There's a faint buzzing near your left foot. You try to ignore it. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a hex bee looking for your sugar drawer again. But no, it's your own wand vibrating gently where it fell last night, beneath a half-eaten muffin and a scroll that just says, "Turnip," you groan. Your spine crackles like old parchment. You reach for the wand, miss, and accidentally knock over a jar labeled emergency raisins. They spill. They always spill. You've never used them in an emergency. You're not even sure if they're magical. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere strange or wonderful, post your location and local time in the comments. I love to imagine where these little journeys find you. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle upright. Your robe is inside out. It's the green one, the one that smells faintly of basilisk breath and has a pocket that sometimes swallows your keys. You try to fix it, give up halfway, and go barefoot into the kitchen where something is already boiling. You do not remember boiling anything. It's in the blue cauldron, the one with the wobbly leg and a bad attitude. Steam puffs upward like it's exhaling disappointment. You lean over and sniff lavender sage. And goat. Not goat meat, no, just goat vibes. There's a cloven hoof energy in the air. You poke it with a spoon. It hisses. Breakfast, then, is toast. You mutter a warming spell which accidentally ignites a nearby doily. You put it out with your tea, which you forgot to sweeten. You sweeten it with sugar crystals shaped like frogs. The frogs melt slowly, as they always do, smiling faintly as they dissolve. It's oddly comforting. As you sip your tea, you review your to-do list, which was written on the back of an old enchantment license. Return borrowed moonstone, or pretend it never existed. Recalibrate, mirror, it keeps complimenting strangers. Feed sourdough familiar. Identify weird buzzing in pantry. Probably bees, possibly prophecy. You finish your tea and reach for the bread knife only to find it missing. You look in your spell drawer. It's there, nestled next to a pair of enchanted socks and something you sincerely hope isn't cursed garlic. Historians still argue whether most medieval sorcerers actually performed structured rituals, or if, like you, they mostly wandered through their own homes in a robe and mild confusion, clutching bits of toast and occasionally chanting by accident. You step outside. Morning has fully arrived now, though the sun is still doing that thing where it refuses to warm your porch. The forest path is quiet. A squirrel watches you warily. A few birds chirp. One of them might be swearing. You decide not to ask. You breathe deeply, smell damp pine, old herbs, and the faint echo of last night's weather spell. You tried to summon gentle rain and ended up with 30 seconds of hail shaped like spoons. Your neighbor, another sorcerer, retired, and grumpy left a note on your doorstep that said simply, "Really?" You pick up the note, crumple it, and use it to wipe butter off your fingers. Magic, after all, is about balance. You turn back to the house just as the mailbox sneezes. That's never good. You approach cautiously. The mailbox, a repurposed badger skull with personality issues, coughs and spits out a scroll tied in red ribbon. Red is not your favorite. Red usually means trials, debts, or potions gone morally ambiguous. You unfurl the scroll. It reads, "To the esteemed wand holder of the Eastern Grove, that's you. You are hereby summoned to the lower court of enchanted affairs for testimony regarding incident number 672. Please arrive before lunch. Wear shoes." You blink. Incident number 672. Was that the cabbage thing, or the duck philosopher, or maybe the invisible harp that bit someone's uncle? You glance at the sky. It's too early for this. You re-roll the scroll. It curls like it knows you're not going to be on time. Back inside, you begin the delicate process of finding 2 matching shoes. This involves 3 closets, 1 spellbook, a drawer full of worms unrelated, and a brief conversation with a pair of boots that have unionized. Eventually, you settle on sandals. The enchanted mirror watches you go and mutters, "Bold choice." You ignore it. As you set out toward the court, your staff leaning gently against your shoulder, your robe still slightly inside out, and your toast half wrapped in a napkin that once belonged to a fawn, you can't help but feel like today is going to be exactly as weird as usual. The path to the lower court of enchanted affairs winds through 3 meadows, 2 slightly judgmental streams, and 1 inexplicably suspicious tree that always seems to lean a bit closer whenever you pass. It smells like cedar and old secrets. You nod to it. It does not nod back. Trees have excellent boundaries. You make it halfway to the court before realizing you've brought the wrong staff. This one is your thinking staff, not your testimony staff. The testimony staff is more formal, with a polished opal top and Fewer snack crumbs fused to the wood. This one, meanwhile, smells faintly of onion and once burst into song during a tax hearing. You shrug. Maybe that will help. A rustle above. You squint. A messenger owl is circling very slowly, like it's lost both altitude and purpose. It drops a scroll that nearly beans you in the face before fluttering onto a nearby mushroom with all the grace of an aging cat. You unroll the scroll. The handwriting is enthusiastic, possibly written by someone using a feather dipped in maple syrup. To the esteemed sorcerer again, you please be aware the court is currently backed up due to unrelated Phoenix drama. Delays expected. Do not summon duplicates of yourself while waiting. Again. You sigh. One time you conjure 3 copies of yourself to help pass the hours, and they immediately form a philosophy debate society and start reorganizing the herbal law codes by emotional intensity. Now you're on a list. You crumple the scroll and feed it to a passing fire sprite who accepts it like a judgmental waiter. Then you keep walking, sandals squelching slightly in the damp moss. You arrive at the court's outer garden just in time to see a man arguing with a frog. You recognize the frog. He's wearing a very small hat. This is normal. The court garden is filled with enchantments, legal puns and topiary animals that may or may not whisper advice. One hedge lion winks at you. You wink back. You're not entirely sure it wasn't a trick of the wind, but better safe than magically mauled. Inside the courthouse, you are directed to waiting chamber B, which is just a stone bench and a fern that sighs occasionally. You sit. Time passes. A clerk brings you tea. It's suspiciously purple. You drink it anyway. It tastes like violets and possibly regret. As you sip, you glance at the docket pinned to the wall. Case 668, One Wizard versus Self-Mirror Theft. Case 669, Cauldron Liability Dispute. Scalded Apprentice. Case 670, Golem Inheritance. Case 671, Rogue Broom Union Complaint. Case 672, That's You. You squint at your case summary regarding improper weather summoning and egg proliferation within village boundaries. So that's what this is about, the Great Egg Cloud. It had started as a simple rain spell, but due to a clerical mix-up, you'd accidentally invoked the Fertile Sky Sigil, which true to name resulted in a gentle downpour of goose eggs over 3 nearby farms. It wasn't dangerous exactly, just persistent, for 7 days. Historians still argue whether the egg cloud was your fault or the fault of the outdated spell registry, which hasn't been updated since the century of the Melted Kings. You personally lean toward blaming the registry. You are called the Bailiff of Immaterial Winds. A large woman with the voice of a kettle and the hair of a lightning bolt summons you into the hearing chamber. You shuffle in. Your sandals make a faint flapping noise. You pretend it's intentional. The court is mostly empty today. One enchanted quill is scribbling notes in mid-air. A trio of magistrates sits behind a levitating stone desk, each wearing a hat that indicates their particular branch of magical law, elemental, ethical, and unexpected outcomes. You bow slightly. They ask you to recount the events of the egg cloud. You begin to explain the humidity, the spell mislabeling the proximity of an unusually judgmental goose. Then your staff hums. It's not a bad hum, more of a thoughtful tone, but it distracts you, and you accidentally describe the goose as a feathered omen of potential breakfast, which makes the ethical magistrate squint. You apologize. The unexpected outcomes. Judge nods sagely. You try to hand over a written testimony, but the parchment unrolls too far and reveals a doodle you made earlier of a crab wearing a crown. You say nothing. They say nothing. You all pretend not to see it. The elemental magistrate asks if you used proper procedural binding. You answer honestly. I thought I did. This is not the answer they want. They begin to deliberate. You wait. The enchanted quill draws a picture of your face and gives it extra eyebrows. Eventually, the court decides no punishment, but you must issue a formal apology to the village and provide enchanted umbrellas for future incidents. You agree. The hearing ends with the gentle bang of a gavel that turns briefly into a hedgehog. You exit quickly. As you step outside, you exhale long, slow, and just slightly smoky. That's normal. You're always a bit smoky after a legal proceeding. You realize you've been holding a small egg this entire time. You have no idea where it came from. You place it gently under the nearest mushroom nod respectfully and begin your walk back to the forest. The forest has shifted slightly in your absence. It always does. Trees lean a touch closer to the path. Moss has claimed a few new stones, and someone, possibly a dryad with a sense of humor, has rearranged the direction sign so that this way probably points toward a rabbit hole. You ignore it. You're still clutching your teacup now, lukewarm, and developing a film that may be sentient. You sip it anyway for the principle of the thing. It tastes like disappointment and lilac. Home is still a few meadows away, but first the library. Your robe pockets contain a small, overdue scroll that's been whispering "Return me" for the past 3 days. It's starting to attract ghosts. Not dangerous ones, just the kind that flicker judgmentally when you forget to alphabetize your footnotes. You veer left down the bramble trail. The path narrows and the trees get grumpier. One whaps your hat off. You apologize. The tree seems satisfied. Soon you reach the archival hollow, a round hill with one large oak door. Several mushrooms in academic robes. They're just decorative, but you always nod respectfully in a brass plaque that reads, "Library of Passive Knowledge, no loud incantations, no fireballs, no arguing with the tomes." You open the door. Warm air greets you, scented faintly with old ink and possibly cinnamon. The library smells how memory would smell if it lived in a root cellar lined with velvet. You enter. It is, as always, too quiet. The shelves don't move unless you ask them to. The books arrange themselves alphabetically, but only by emotion. So, Wistful Charms of the Southlands sits next to Melancholy Hexes for Garden Pests, which itself is nestled between How to Cry Politely and the Lamenting Codex of Misplaced Umbrellas. You whisper your query. Return one minor scroll category. Regret subheading Unnecessary Dances. A small breeze lifts your hair. The shelves sigh. A drawer slides open with exaggerated slowness. You place the scroll inside. It grumbles. A tiny puff of glitter escapes. Job done. You decide to stay and browse. You need something light, something non-binding, preferably without footnotes that argue back. You reach for a slim volume titled Minor Spells for Moderately Lost Sorcerers. The book hums approvingly. You crack it open and immediately sneeze. A voice above you mutters, "Cover your nose next time." You look up. It's one of the ceiling spirits, a faint shimmer vaguely shaped like a librarian with too many spectacles. It glares at you. You nod in apology. You move to a reading cushion in the corner stuffed with goose feathers and possibly one lost poem and settle in with your book. The first spell is titled Locating One's Hat. You whisper it half-heartedly and your hat floats back from wherever it had sulked off to and lands gently on your head. You mutter thanks. The second spell is more confusing. Summon a friend who isn't annoying. You glance around. Nothing happens. You nod. That's about right. The third spell misfires entirely. You only think the word toast, but the page glows and your hands fill with 2 slices of perfectly warm, slightly charred bread. You eat one. You hand the other to a passing scholar who thanks you without asking why. Historians still argue whether libraries like this truly existed, or whether tales of self-organizing magical archives were simply exaggerated metaphors for the chaos of medieval manuscript culture. But as your half-eaten toast floats itself into a waste bin and the ceiling spirit resumes cataloging philosophical mushrooms, you decide it's real enough. You try one more spell. Translate frog. The book chuckles. You close it. Time has passed. The sunlight slanting through the windows is more golden now, more forgiving. You rise slowly, joints cracking like a respectful applause, and place the book back on the shelf. It nestles itself in next to Enchanted Etiquette for Forest Socials. As you head for the door, a small book jumps off a shelf and taps you lightly on the shin. You look down. It's titled, "Are You Forgetting Something?" You stare at it. You are definitely forgetting something. But the book refuses to elaborate. You tuck it under your arm and exit the library. Outside, the shadows are long and your sandals make soft flapping sounds in the moss again. The tree that slapped your hat earlier waves a low branch. You wave back. By the time you reach your cottage, the sun is thinking about setting. The windows glow with cozy light. A few crows are perched on your roof arguing about whether a shiny rock is worth stealing. You leave them to it. You place the cryptic book on the windowsill, where it immediately opens itself to a blank page and begins writing something in your handwriting. You decide to let it finish before getting suspicious. You open the cupboard. You realize, oh, that's what you forgot. Your sourdough familiar. You were supposed to feed it. It's still there in the jar, looking a little dry and humming softly to itself in an annoyed key of F sharp. You whisper an apology and feed it honey and a small pinch of thyme. It forgives you. You light a few candles. They flicker into life with satisfying little pops. The cottage smells like burnt sage books and toast. You sit. You exhale. You have not solved any major mysteries today. You have not rewritten the laws of the universe. You did, however, return your library scroll and only mildly embarrass yourself in court. You call that a win. A knock at the door. Not a loud one. Not the kind that suggests danger delivery or divine intervention. More like someone gently tapping with the back of a spoon just to see if you're home and just to make sure you're not currently vaporizing anything. You open it a crack. It's Thistlebrand. You sigh. Thistlebrand is an alchemist, self-titled, possibly self-trained, definitely self-important. He wears too many layers of velvet and a monocle that changes color depending on how smug he feels. Today, it's a shade of emerald that can only be described as insufferable pine. Behind him trots his cat Lady Sniffles, a fluffy menace with the personality of a duchess and the dietary habits of a small dragon. I brought soup. Thistlebrand says, holding out a jar that's steaming faintly and humming something that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby sung through a fan. You let him in. He sweeps into the cottage like a man entering a throne room. You pretend not to notice the trail of glitter he leaves behind or the fact that his boots appear to be whispering insults at your rug. You place the soup on the table. It gurgles, then sighs. Lady Sniffles leaps onto the windowsill and stares directly into your soul. You try not to blink. You blink. Lovely place, Thistlebrand says, looking around the room like a tax collector. Still haven't replaced the smoke curtain, I see. You haven't. Last week you tried to install a magical privacy mist that only activates when someone gossips near your window. Instead, it activates when anyone says the word turnip. It's been foggy for days. You gesture to the tea kettle. It obliges, warming itself with a gentle huff and only a small amount of sarcasm. As the tea brews, Thistlebrand begins to tell you about his latest invention, a potion that makes bees polite. You'd be amazed, he says. They now form queues. Some of them bow. You nod slowly. You are not amazed. He pulls a flask from his belt and hands it to you. The liquid inside is the color of distant regrets and smells faintly of marmalade and old socks. You raise an eyebrow. It's for dreams, he says. One drop and your subconscious organizes itself alphabetically. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists truly believed their elixirs could manipulate dreams or if they just got bored mixing frog saliva with moon water. Thistlebrand, however, believes with the full sincerity of a man who has never once doubted himself or the narrative he tells his cat. You offer him soup. He declines. He offers you soup. You decline. Lady Sniffles growls at the soup and then licks it. You call that a draw. Eventually, Thistlebrand grows tired of being ignored by your kitchen implements and begins poking around your bookshelf. "Ah," he says, pulling out a dusty old tome. "You still have Muddlemore's Inversion Codex. You do." It's not a particularly useful book, mostly riddles about subtracting gravity from thought, but the cover is embossed with tiny stars that move when the moon is full, and that seems reason enough to keep it around. Thistlebrand flips through it. He stops. He frowns. "Did you know there's a page missing?" You did not. You take the book from him and stare at the gap. There's no tear, no scorch mark, just a gentle void like the page was never there or perhaps chose to leave. You shrug. He gasps. "That could be valuable." You nod again, then offer him a scone. It's slightly burnt. He accepts it like it's a treasure. Lady Sniffles bites it in half. The tea is ready. You both sip quietly for a moment. The fire crackles. The enchanted candle on the table reshapes its flame into a swan. No one comments on it. It's just one of those moments where silence does all the talking. Finally, Thistlebrand sighs. "Well," he says, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, "I suppose I should return to my laboratory. I left a flask of vinegar arguing with a teaspoon, and I fear they may unionize." You nod solemnly. He gathers his cloak, his ego, and his feline, then steps out into the twilight. You watch him disappear into the forest, his boots muttering snide farewells to your doormat. You close the door. Peace for now. You return to the soup, which is still humming. You take a bite. It tastes like rosemary thyme, the herb, not the concept, and possibly a memory from your adolescence when you once turned a duck invisible and then forgot about it for 3 weeks. The soup murmurs approval. You feel marginally more rested. You clean up. The spoon washes itself. The bowl tries slips and ends up in your lap. You accept this. The house dims. Outside, the last crows flap off to wherever they sleep, and the wind shifts to its nighttime voice, longer, lower. Full of secrets it's not really interested in telling. You light one more candle. This one glows blue. It smells like rain and ink. On the windowsill, the cryptic book you brought home from the library flips to a new page. Don't forget your ritual. You sigh. You never forget your ritual, except when you do. You stare at the page. The book doesn't elaborate. No glowing letters, no gentle whispering from the margins, not even a smug rustle of pages. Just that sentence, still written in your handwriting, underlined once. Don't forget your ritual. You murmur a quick thank you to the book, which gives a self-satisfied shiver and flops shut like a cat that's done being observed. The ritual. You rub your temples. Right, it's Thursday. Or is it Tuesday? It doesn't matter. It's the evening. And in the evenings you perform the ritual of reasonable closure, as prescribed in the old calendar of practical sorcery, revised edition, post-plague addendum. It's less about power and more about mental hygiene, like brushing your teeth, but for the soul. You gather the supplies. A single candle, one bowl of clear water, a feather from a bird that doesn't remember its own name, a small bell that only rings when no one is listening, and of course your ritual robe, the one with constellations stitched in glowing thread, half of which you misnamed on purpose just to annoy your old astrology instructor. You place Tumberisising carefully on your meditation rug. The rug hums appreciatively, then sneezes. You pat it. It's doing its best. You light the candle. The flame flickers into life and immediately begins to sway in time with some tune you can't hear. You suspect it's the same tune the soup was humming earlier. That soup knew things. You settle into a cross-legged position. You inhale. You exhale. You do this 3 times. Then you realize your knees are not on speaking terms with the floor today and switch to kneeling. You begin the chant. It's a quiet series of syllables passed down from master to apprentice for centuries. Historians still argue whether it actually means anything or if it was invented during a particularly musical thunderstorm to help pass the time. Either way, it's tradition. You chant. The bell rings faintly. You're not touching it. That's good. That's part of the ritual. The bell must ring itself. You sprinkle water from the bowl into the air. It catches the candlelight and turns momentarily into tiny stars, then vanishes. The effect is mostly visual. Spiritually, it's supposed to represent releasing the day. You think about today, about the egg in your hand, the courtroom, the philosopher frog, the book with a missing page, the soup, the monocle, about forgetting your ritual and being reminded by your own handwriting, about the sense that something almost happened, but didn't. You realize you've forgotten a line. You panic briefly, then mumble a replacement phrase that sounds vaguely like the original. The candle doesn't seem to notice. The bell gives a hiccup. You continue. The final part of the ritual involves blowing out the candle while imagining all your unresolved thoughts going with it, floating up in the smoke off into the night like mildly confused fireflies. You blow. The flame flickers, sputters, goes out. Smoke curls upward in a sleepy spiral. You follow it with your eyes, then your whole head, until you're just lying on the rug, staring at the ceiling, which has thoughtfully started showing stars again. It's not a spell. It's just a habit of the house. When it knows you're trying to rest, it shows stars. You've never asked how. You suspect it involves bats. You stay there for a while. The stars twinkle. A breeze stirs the curtains. The bell rolls gently in its dish, then stills. Eventually you rise. It's time for bed. You change into your sleep robe, identical to your day robe except slightly fluffier and with less ambition. You fluff your pillow, which whispers a compliment. You decline to answer. But just as you're about to crawl into bed, you notice something, a soft glow coming from your writing desk. You walk over. The cryptic book has opened again. The page now says, "Check the garden." You sigh the sigh of someone who suspects this won't be over until something moderately strange has occurred. You throw on your boots, one of which now whistles, and open the door. The garden is quiet, very quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think about ancient things and lost keys and why your tomato plant always looks guilty. You step out onto the path. The moonlight spills in silver puddles across the herbs. The chives shimmer. And then you see it. Near the far fence, half hidden under a drooping sunflowers, a light, faint, pulsing, like a heartbeat made of candle wax. You walk toward it. It's not threatening, not cold, just waiting. You crouch. Beneath the sunflower, nestled among the roots, is a stone. Round, flat, warm to the touch. It's carved with the same constellation symbols from your ritual robe, but correctly named this time. You did not put it there. You pick it up. It feels like something left for you, not urgent, not dangerous. Just a note from the world that it still remembers your name. You turn it over. One word scratched faintly into the bottom rest. You nod. You place it gently on your windowsill. Then, without further investigation, questioning, or philosophical inquiry, you return inside and go to bed. Your bed is exactly as you left it, warm, slightly tilted, and covered in just enough blankets to suggest you're hiding from responsibilities. You slide under them like a scroll into its case limbs, creaking gently, hair full of the faint scent of incense and soup steam. The pillow adjusts beneath your head with a muffled like it's heard things today but chooses not to comment. You appreciate its restraint. Somewhere a clock ticks. Or maybe that's just the noise your left boot makes now. Either way, the house is settling, the kind of settling that includes creaking beams, whispering curtains, and a faint noise from the pantry that might be mice, might be prophecy, and will be someone else's problem tomorrow. You close your eyes. You open them again when a faint scratching noise echoes from the fireplace. Of course. You sit up. By the hearth, in a small circle of moonlight, stands the laundry. It's not threatening. It's not even fully corporeal. Just a stack of robes, a few socks, and a grumpy towel, all hovering in an accusatory cluster. You had meant to wash them 3 days ago. You sigh. Now you ask. The towel flutters. You whisper a quick domestication spell. Nothing fancy, just a gentle fold and stack command. The laundry settles into its proper basket, still a little offended but mollified. You promise to enchant the wash basin tomorrow. You probably won't. Historians still argue whether household magic was truly common among medieval sorcerers, or simply exaggerated by later chroniclers desperate to explain how one person could own so many perfectly ironed cloaks. Either way, your laundry remains dramatic. With a final stretch, you slide back under the covers. This time, nothing interrupts. Outside, the forest hums in its sleep. Inside, the candle on your desk dims all by itself. The cryptic book on the windowsill has closed again. On its spine, new letters have appeared. Good night. You smile. You think about the courtroom, about Thistlebrand and his bees, about Lady Sniffles judging your soup, about the glowing stone, the argument between a teaspoon and vinegar, and the book that asked if you were forgetting something. Were you? Maybe. But some days aren't for solving. Some days are for existing, for floating gently through a soup-scented reality of mild confusion, light embarrassment, and the occasional philosophical goose. You exhale, deep, even. The bed creaks softly as if to say, you did enough, and perhaps for today, you did. Now, as your thoughts grow slower and softer, let them settle gently, like ash from a long-cooled fire. You've wandered through your strange, sleepy day. You've returned library scrolls that whispered too much. You've sat through a trial that involved eggs, forgotten spells, and polite bowing. You've made soup hum and let a cat question your very worth. And somehow, you've still made it to bed. So now, sink deeper. Let your limbs grow heavy and warm like enchanted velvet. Let your chest rise and fall in the calm rhythm of forgotten chants and sleepy bells. The garden outside is quiet. The stars are blinking slowly. Even the constellations on your robe have begun to yawn. Nothing else needs your attention. The teacups will clean themselves, probably. The moon will continue its gentle orbit without your help. The talking book has gone quiet, and even the slightly judgmental candle on your shelf has finally flickered out. You've done well. There's a certain kind of magic in rest after all, not the flashy kind, not the spell that shakes the sky kind, but the kind that lets a tired sorcerer curl up in bed and forget just for a little while about socks that demand attention and rituals that forget themselves. Let yourself forget, too. You're safe. You're home. And there is nothing else to remember tonight. Sleep well, wandering sorcerer. Sleep well, whoever you are.